The second type of cognitive processes that you're going to learn is transfer. In this video, you'll be able to describe various forms of transfer and how you can facilitate transfer in your classroom. And transfer is an important concept because it becomes the basis of more complex cognitive processes, just such as critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity that you're going to learn in the following sessions. Transfer means using or applying content after learning it, particularly in new contexts. Positive transfer happens when something learned before helps to learn something new. For instance, someone who knows how to count in French from 1 to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It may be easier for them to learn how to count in Spanish from 1 to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, because there are some kind of similar pronunciation in ways how to count from 1 to 4 between French and Spanish. Negative transfer, on the other hand, happens when something learned before makes it harder to learn something new. For instance, like when I learned French as a high school student, I knew some English words. Sometimes knowing English helped how to learn French because there are some similar words, but at the same time, because there are some words that do not have the same spelling, that really confuses and make me lose a lot of points during quizzes and midterms. Like for instance, mathematics are spelled differently in French and English, and that word always makes me confused. The negative case that is illustrated in this PowerPoint is that thinking 4.14 is larger than 4.4 because one may think more digits means bigger number. So this is another example of negative transfer. Transfer can also be classified into general transfer and specific transfer. General transfer occurs when all your learning affects learning and performance in somewhat dissimilar situation. For instance, let's say a person learned how to take notes in mathematics. After learning how taking notes can be beneficial for their own learning, they become to take notes in other classes or other courses, including geography, history, English, French, and the other subjects. This is one example of general transfer. And actually, this is something that I want to happen to your own learning. So you just submitted a teaching and diversity statement, right? You have thought about various sources of student diversity and how you accommodate these kind of how you're going to facilitate these kind of diverse students in your own classroom. Although you have thought about it and written your instructional strategies, I want you to actually apply the knowledge in your actual classrooms. So if that happens, please think about this course and the concept of general transfer. And I really wish general transfer happens in your future classroom. Specific transfer happens when all your learning affects learning and performance in a very similar situation. And it's more typical for academic content because new content can overlap with what was learned before. However, and teachers tend to assume that students, because students have learned certain concepts in other subjects, they can skip explaining, and they kind of think that students will automatically make transfer in the specific context, but that is not always true. For instance, I have taught again English to my students, and I knew that my students learned what noun, verb, and adjectives are from their Korean class. However, when I taught these concepts in English, they just couldn't make the simple specific transfer. So I had to explain the concepts of noun, verbs, and adjectives again, even though I knew that they knew the concept well and learned it from Korean class. So as teachers, we should not assume that specific transfer would happen. And if students are having difficulties, you may need to elaborate and explain in more detail. Now that we have learned different types of transfer, let's look at factors affecting transfer and ultimately how we can foster transfer. When students engage in learning in more meaningful ways, as compared to rote learning, the concepts that we learned in the previous chapter, right? Learning, cognition, and memory, they are more likely to make transfer. Similarity to original learning can also influence this transfer. For instance, as a Korean, it was easier for me to learn Japanese because there are some more familiar grammar structures and words as compared to learning English, which has totally different alphabet system, different grammatical structures. When students perceive the information and skills to be relevant to many different disciplines and real-world situations, they also tend to make more transfers. For instance, so as a teacher, we need to provide the activities and learning materials that can be perceived by students as relevant to real-world situations and many and diverse disciplines. A mathematics teacher, when teaching algebra, may kind of offer this kind of boring question, classic algebra question, where a train leaves Cairo at 3 a.m., averaging 30 miles per hour. Another train headed in the same direction leaves Cairo at 6 a.m., averaging 60 miles per hour. To the nearest tenth, how many hours after the second train leaves will it overtake the first train? Do you want to solve the problem, and do you want to learn like algebra and mathematics to kind of solve this kind of inauthentic, very contrite question? Not really, right? First of all, I think why Cairo and 30 miles per hour? It's so slow, right? So, also what I want to emphasize here is that you try to provide the like materials and activities that are more relevant to your students' lives. Like for instance, if you need to use the concept of speed and distance, maybe you can elaborate or make a question that is related to like legendary school marathon that happened in your school field day, so that students can find it like how these concepts how this concept of speed, distance, velocity like are related to their own lives. We also need to provide opportunities to students so that they can practice what they learn with some kind of authentic activities. And if you can foster a classroom environment that encourages and expects transfer, it can also be helpful. So one example that I want to show you is that, so when I taught English, there are students who claim that they know nothing about English, which is not true because I know that they play games like League of Legends, Overwatch. I'm not sure if you're familiar with these online games, but they're very popular. They are all English. Their character's name, the skills name, the items names, most of them were English. They just were not able to make the transfer between between the languages. So what I did to like really low proficiency students who cannot speak English at all, I taught them English phonics using the character's name. So based on their knowledge, they all know the name of the characters. I taught like pronunciations like Anivia, like then like Anivia in like any in Anivia is the word that is used in animation, animal, like this. So as a teacher, we should always try to have students like transfer the knowledge because there is a limitation on how much we can teach. However, if we can make students apply the knowledge to their own context and to new disciplines, that is actually more helpful for them.